Previously, when we set up our DHCP zone, we bypassed configuring some of the options during the setup wizard. In this activity, we're going to go back in and we are going to configure those options to help our environment access the internet and DNS and other resources. So we're going to jump in over to server DM1, and underneath our new scope, we see we have scope options. Right now, there are no scope options, so I'm going to right-click and say Configure Options. For the most part, there are 2 or 3 different options that we want to make sure we have configured everywhere. The first is going to be router, or how we get to the internet. The next is going to be 6 for DNS servers. How can we find DNS? And then the third is going to be 15, which is what is my DNS domain name. So let's start out with that configuration. Number 3, we check the box next to 3, and then the router or the default gateway in this environment is 10.99.0.250, and then we say add. Once that's done, we go down to number 6, check the box, and the DNS server that we want our clients contacting is server DC1, whose IP is 10.99.0.220, and then add. And then we scroll down to 15, check the box, and the DNS name that we want for our domain is az800.corp. And okay. At this point, we can now see that we have our 3 scope options configured for DHCP. The next time our clients begin to request an update for their DHCP addresses, they will get those 3 options right there. Let's see, we previously had a default gateway. That's interesting. I'm going to clear that out. You don't have to do that, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to go into network connections, adapter options, Ethernet 0, properties, IPv4. We see the IP address and DNS is already set up, and the default gateway is right there. I'm just going to select that and remove. Okay. That is not necessary for this lab, but I'm still going to do it anyways. At this point, if I do another IP config, I'll just do IP config. We will see that there is no default gateway. There should be no default gateway. Apparently there still is, as well as no DNS server. So IP config /all. Check for Ethernet 0. IP address, subnet mask. All right. The lab's making me a liar. Should be no no DNS server as well as no default gateway. We'll go with it. Okay, so for the lab, we want to do IP config /renew. So this is going to renew its IP address. We previously had .1 as our IP. We now have .1 again. We can see we now have our default gateway as well as our DNS server should be specified. And so now very shortly, our network icon down here should shortly begin to show internet access. Hooray! Those are the global configuration options. Additionally, we can change options for our reservations. So if we look specific to our reservation, we can right click on server SA1 and say configure options. Here we're intentionally going to break it. If I go down to 6 and choose DNS servers, I'll turn that on and I will set this to 10.99.0.2 and add. This should fail, but I'm going to say go ahead anyways. yes, and okay. At this point, if I do an ipconfig renew, that will renew my IP address, and then I do an ipconfig all. And when I look at Ethernet 0, I see my DNS server is currently set to 10.99.0.2, which we know is not a valid DNS server, and therefore my DNS queries aren't going to work. Ultimately, to get things back up and running, I'm going to come back here to server DM1. I'm going to right click on my reservation and say delete. And then on SA1, I'm just going to renew. And that should get me a brand new DHCP address.